Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is February 1st, so it's a whole new month, a whole new opportunity for success, or expectation of failure, or however, which way you want to look at it. Rankings reset, so I'll be set down lower. Looks like the amount of gym rewards will be changed by going up from diamond and platinum. So you're getting higher rewards the more you play ranked, which honestly is probably the first time we've seen any kind of like good news as far as these notifications. And we get these notifications like every time you log in. I missed like 6 days as far as daily logins on Yu-Gi-Oh! Last month. I don't know how that happened. We've got a new Duel Live. I'm starting the stream later today because I'm snowed in, and it's not really that big of a deal, but it did have the nice little side effect of kind of stopping everything that was distracting me and causing my insomnia and sleep schedule to mess up. So I just had the wonderful opportunity to sleep in, and as such I was capable then of getting a better night's sleep, as it were. Let's open the tin pack here, even though we're a little short on that. So yeah, that kind of worked out for me. It didn't work out for anybody else, certainly, to be snowed in, but it's a nice little pause. Let me kind of catch up on always being behind in life. I finished Dicey Dungeon as far as just trying to do a short accountability section here, which that's, I guess, my new goal here. And yeah, I definitely can't recommend Dicey Dungeon for anything. That theme event, I went maybe a little bit further playing off screen, but not very farther. Yep. So yeah, that was a problem there. I was trying to get a daily quest for like pendulum summoning, so I was using this deck that just does not work. And yeah, I still don't really have enough time to try and find a new meta deck, see if I've somehow gained enough crafting points, see if I've gained enough cards to try to find what the meta is at the moment as far as a better deck to play. And some of that definitely is just, I don't want to prioritize my time towards that. A lot of it is that, but some of that is just straight up the way Yu-Gi-Oh's meta is. Technically, the meta really shouldn't have changed too much because they haven't introduced new cards, so Zodiac Tri-Brigade still should be, if not in the previous meta, the meta before that. This guy's trying to summon a Destiny hero, so let's just end that now so that we do that. After finishing Dicey Dungeons, I decided to play The Legend of Bumbo, which is a strategy game that is sold as a prequel to The Binding of Isaac, set in the same world, imaginary world, although animated in a 3D cardboard cutout visuals. Legend of Bumbo feels like it's going to be probably a lot shorter of an experience than Binding of Isaac by far. Binding of Isaac, you could easily put 200 hours into it, whereas Bumbo feels like it is probably closer to 10 hours at most. It is incredibly different an experience also, in that you are really having to take your time and move slowly, step by step, in a turn-based arena and turn-based games, instead of having items, you have spells that are named and look like the items in the Binding of Isaac, but you need to make matches. It's a match 4 game with actually a pretty small play field, so I don't think it would maintain its welcome very long if it went too long. And it only seems to have about 5 characters that you unlock anyways, compared to probably about 18 different character class builds in Binding of Isaac Repentance. Once you include like all the hard mode versions of those characters. Which, that's probably fine overall. It's probably very nice to have a spin-off game that's just shorter and smaller. Inherently, Edmund McMillan and Team Nicholas are just victims of their own success, and they can't do much other than make something Binding of Isaac related. Because yeah, they're really not that good of developers. Like, they've made a great game by having great concepts and being good enough to program it and continue to support it forever. But if they were to try to make a 3D AAA first-person shooter type game, they probably couldn't handle that in any way, and it would probably come out pretty bad. I know they're working, Edmund McMillan is working on some kind of like Cats game, but he really is just an indie developer. And yeah, it would be probably a shame too if too many new people came on the team, or if Edmund McMillan sold Binding of Isaac to like Microsoft or some company, and then you would see exactly the same thing that Microsoft has done with Minecraft, where Notch made Minecraft, or at least the foundations of Minecraft, and now increasingly Microsoft is just trying to make spin-off Fortnite clones and strategy games, and call them Minecraft to squeeze every penny out of it. Of course, it'd be really hard to do that with Binding of Isaac, and almost certainly if somebody did buy the license, the rights to Binding of Isaac, they would immediately start to try and censor it and water it down. I'd say The Legend of Bob-omb, not really that watered down, but it definitely is in its theming and feeling not really going for a harsh, like, anti-religion, edgelord type stance, really. As much. Slightly less, I would say. Maybe 10-20% less. There's somebody on the chat that says, is Inferno Dark Emperor? It says, greetings Earthbound Immortals, I've summoned you all. I don't know if that is a reference to something or not. I don't get the reference, certainly, if it is a reference. So yeah, I'll play Legends of Bumbo. I'm gonna mispronounce the name each time, apparently. As kind of a comparison to Dicey Dungeon, which was just way too hard and was a rogue like LIKE, so at no point did you actually unlock anything to make the game different or better or easier. And it certainly shows in the statistics that only 6% of people on Steam had beaten the boss of the main content, let alone ignoring the 2 DLC content, which the DLC was very minimal and not necessary. Both games probably would do well if they had been cell phone games in the first place, though. With just constantly randomizing encounters and daily quests to get more people to play it for a longer amount of time. When you get down to puzzle games or random dice games, that is kind of a category that makes a lot of sense to be a cell phone game versus being a PC game that also is on the Switch, which both Legend of Bumbo and Dicey Dungeons also heavily, I suspect, were Switch PC games, made for the Switch particularly. And that's something I would say, generally, not to get into too much of a rant, that needs to not happen as much anymore. When Nintendo releases its next console, it shouldn't just sway a vast amount of game developers into compromising their vision, for lack of a better term, in favor of just trying to sell on the Nintendo console. Like, we've seen it happen with the Wii. Wii became very popular and it pushed a lot of developers to either not make any games on the Wii or drastically change how their games controlled on the Wii, which that was fine at the time. It brought in a lot of new players that were very much fair weather players, as it were. They didn't come back for the Wii U, certainly, and they only really bought things like Wii Sports and nothing else. Let's see, can we cancel here? Let's start with this one. And then the Switch pushed a lot of people, certainly a lot of game developers, to making low resource heavy, or I guess resource light games, so that they would play on the Switch with more of a mobile focus. It's a little bit more logical to do this because you're getting a plus 100. I'm not sure if it's really even necessary to use the Zodiac Trident at this point. I could have potentially saved that for later. Let's see, is there anything else in the accountability section I need to talk about, though? No, I don't think so. There's really not much going on. I'm still working on the Tuya smart bulb setups and programming. I've mostly gotten it down and think it's working consistently enough. Of course, I may be saying the exact opposite thing a week from now when some new bug potentially pops up. Certainly, since it is cold outside and it's snowing, my thermostat is setting off alarms for low humidity because all of the humidity is being sucked out of the air when it's cold. I had this coconut snow mat that no technology around it, but I was hoping that would make like a safe walkway when it gets icy on the sidewalk, but inherently, well, it may help a little bit if there's a little bit of ice. Once you have just a full blanket of ice on the streets or on your sidewalk, you just can't go anywhere anyways. And if you do have to go somewhere, it's such a desperate situation at that point, nothing's gonna help you. And I have some ice melt like pellets. I tried cat litter or kitty litter once on the snow, I think last year, and it just turned it into a horrific brown sludge. It was not good at it. So whoever suggested that turned out to be a dud. Still playing Destiny Child, which is about to update to yet another expansion in just a matter of hours. Still playing Goblins vs. Gnomes for no reason. Still playing Marvel Snap for no reason. Marvel Snap, not really doing anything much, even though they've made that change to potentially make it easier to get some cards. They're doing it right as they're adding some newer cards. And months in now, you really would have expected that either I would have been so far away from getting all the cards that it would have just been very natural for a free-to-play player to realize that and not be upset by that, or I would have all the cards at this point. And with the speed at which I was getting cards, I definitely would have expected to have unlocked them all at this point. Although if I compare it to something like Destiny Child, like it took me probably 2 years minimum, at least 2 years, to get all the characters that I could get. So a couple of them were limited time. Before I had at least one copy of every Destiny Child thing. Every Destiny Child. Which, yeah. That's how gacha games go. Is that you're constantly being asked to get more and more resources and feed those resources into other resources, and that's exactly what Marvel Snap does too, is you get boosters of the card after you get the first one, but that's effectively the same as if you just got duplicates of the cards and then fed one card into the other card. Speaking of cards, they're the old collectible X-Men trading cards from, I would assume this would be the 90s or so, maybe even late 80s. There's an art book that they've put out on, and it was on sale for like $13 hardback on Amazon, so I ordered that. Also, Whatever Happened to the Cape Crusader is a like collection, a side story around Batman that I've heard is pretty good, so that was like $10 off in a new, I think, hardback mode too. So I ordered that, which it is inherently stupid for me to be buying books, but if I'm buying an art book and a comic book, that is probably my level of attention span as far as reading. I'm still watching Naruto. I'm at like season 5, and there definitely is an episode around season 5, not right at the beginning, where they've finally pulled the trigger and started to show some blood and really point out that, yeah, the only solution for fighting a lot of these ninjas is to straight up kill them and let them die. Whereas up until that point, it's been danced around, it's been maybe hinted at but not shown on screen. Blood hasn't been the thing. What's funny is the exact episode before that, the Rock Lee grabs the wrong medicine. He grabs sake, alcohol, and thinks it's medicine, and gets drunk and starts fighting in a drunken monkey fighting style, because he's drunk. And what's funny about that is at the beginning of this conversation, in one scene, they say elixir in the English dub, and it doesn't matter because like they translate the word sake literally incorrectly when they show the bottle. So there was really no point in saying elixir unless that was just supposed to be a joke, but that would have been a joke that wouldn't have quite made so much sense. And then so it like cuts away from that scene where they're saying elixir, and I'm like, oh well, they're trying to avoid the idea of saying alcohol, and that this underage kid is getting drunk on sake. There's even a funny point where he says an underage ninja shouldn't drink alcohol, as if underage other kids should or are allowed to drink alcohol. And I'm like, okay, then that's an odd distinction to say. But then you come back from that scene and they maybe do a cutaway to another scene, and then a minute or two later they come back from that scene and they're saying sake. So it definitely just feels like this is the point where the where I don't know what he was trying to do there. Was he trying to lose? Yeah, it seems like that may have just been the point where the localizers and English translators in Rydo gave up and said, alright, five seasons in, it's probably been 6 to 8 years since that series started. So if Naruto Season 1, Episode 1 was targeting a 10-year-old, you're probably close to a 16 to 18-year-old in your audience, so it's time to move it up. Yeah. But they did it pretty sharply. The problem with Season 5, though, certainly is that it really is just following Sasuke running away from the Leaf Village for, it seems like, the entire season, and giving you a lot of excuses for fights after, which is probably what you want, but you would think that there might be some more variety around it, or just random reasons for fights. They don't want to do another tournament arc where that introduces a bunch of enemies. They do want to show a story, but the actual narrative, if you were watching Naruto when it came out, would have been painfully slow. Yeah. You don't even get the completion of a single fight in a single episode. So if you're waiting a week, or if there's a holiday or something and you're waiting 2 or 3 weeks from one episode to the other, that would have been a nightmare. Of course, that's what TV was back then anyways, as it was just this horrific experience where you had to tune in every week, and if you missed a week and you didn't have the later DVR technology, you basically had very little chance of seeing that episode ever. Otherwise, I don't have anything else to do. I have some ambitions, certainly, where I need to do a Lego set. I need to finish Metroid Prime. Like, on one hand, there's kind of an argument where if I tried to burn through Metroid, not Prime, Metroid Dread on the Nintendo Switch, if I burn through that before the end of the month, that might be helpful, so I could hand it to somebody else that I'm potentially going to meet at the end of the month. But if I don't, whatever, I still already could give them Kirby Forgotten World. Plus, if I'm playing a Nintendo Switch game, then I'm taking time out of making pre-recorded footage, which isn't great. I'm looking at the YouTube Shorts, and I'm not sure that the 4 a.m. release is helpful. So I might, once that runs out, shift that time slot to just the later in the day. I think it might just be 4 a.m. Central Time, maybe just too early for people, and YouTube Shorts probably have to go pretty viral within the first few minutes to really get on the highest wave of what are probably multiple sawtooth waves of chances of being popular. And then they've got the starting in February or starting at the end of February, I'm not sure which one it is, that they're going to start doing revenue sharing. Although for YouTube Shorts, although the revenue sharing is pretty awful, and the way they're calculating it is somewhat awful, and there is an allegation certainly that if an ad plays right as somebody enters the YouTube Shorts for some reason, unless that never happens, YouTube is going to take 100% of revenue for that first ad, on top of YouTube basically splitting all of the total profit from all YouTube Shorts with the music industry first and foremost. So they say basically if your YouTube Short uses one song, then half of the ad revenue goes to the music industry just there, and then the rest does not go to you for that YouTube Short. As far as ad revenue, it goes into a pool, and then that pool is divided amongst all of the people who are partnered in the YouTube Partner Program. So if you make YouTube Shorts that don't use any music at all, you're still losing money out to the music industry because other people are using music in their shorts. And even once it gets into that partner sharing pool, then they start dividing it amongst by the number of views every YouTube Short person gets. So somebody that gets 1 million views is going to get more of that pool than somebody who gets only 1 view, just to make the numbers simple. But even at that, it's still not a good deal, because then YouTube takes 45% of that, which is a ridiculously high amount. Like, people complain about 30% cuts on Steam. And to go from 30% cuts to 45% cut, that's a lot. And you have to point out, certainly, that none of it really matters at all. It to me seems like basically nobody other than the top maybe 10,000 YouTube Short creators are going to make any money at all on it. It's such an awful, just totally awful option and offering. Because remember, you can't even get into the YouTube Partner Program unless you have 10 million views. So they are really expecting people to have like 10 million views in 90 days. So you have to be this like professional YouTube Short creator, TikToker. And it definitely doesn't feel like these offerings ever get any better at YouTube. So it's not like at some point they're going to say 10 million views. Actually, it's way too many. Let's lower that down to a more realistic 1 million views, which even that's probably way too high. Or that they're going to improve the revenue sharing in any way. Yeah, so I definitely would say if you want to get into YouTube, you're probably 10 years too late. If you want to get into YouTube Shorts, nobody really has much of a chance at that. It definitely just boils down to something you would do for fun and then see what happens, and more than likely nothing will happen. Alright. I'm just going to activate this a second time as a chain. I don't think I have anything else to talk about. In 30 minutes seems to be like that's where it's gonna go as far as an accountability section, even if you're trying to go quickly. So let's start going through the video game news instead. Let's see. Unity for Games, which is the Unity engine, has announced memory optimization getting easier with a memory profile version 1.0. It's out of experimental and available for everyone in use in Unity 22.2 text stream. So, for laymen, this is probably way over the head of just average gamers that don't know anything about programming, but for programmers, this probably helps you do a better job of memory optimization for your games. I would assume this is mostly computer memory RAM, not graphics RAM, graphics video RAM, both of which need optimizations quite a bit. But yeah, there could certainly be better improvement. But if you're making a Unity game in the first place, though, you're probably not running into as many of the shader compilation errors that DF Retro talks about all the time anyways, because that is kind of a unique to the Unreal Engine problem. And as far as technology goes, it's interesting that Forspoken is like the first game to come out using direct storage as a feature, and it being a Square Enix game that's apparently just terrible as a game and terrible as a program in general, there's really nothing to highlight as far as major success because of direct storage, which that's a shame because direct storage might be very helpful in loading files faster, loading save files, and loading like shader files that have been pre-compiled or previously compiled. But then you still would have to get it into the RAM and use it correctly in the RAM. At a certain level, I question why you need to create a new system with direct storage instead of just optimizing the existing file access code to be faster and better. That way everything is just backward compatible wise improved. Although I guess there is a slight argument that if games are basically expecting it to take 10 seconds to load a file and they're showing a cutscene because it takes 10 seconds to load a file and then it loads instantaneously and the cutscene cuts off, that could be some problems. Looks like I'm going to lose here. Apparently February is Xbox Anime Month, which you can get discounts on anime products and games, TV, movies from the Microsoft Store and more. Noticeably, not a lot of coverage on that, certainly. Yeah. They also, Xbox on Twitter, highlighted these games, and this is what I wanted to point out, is that one of these games is called SOPA, and that certainly is going to create some name confusion around the Stop Online Piracy Act. It's a terrible name to name your game, unless you're actually taking one for the team and trying to make it so people can't Google SOPA and get news about the Stop Online for Piracy Act that people tried very hard to fight, and still I think a lot of the elements of SOPA probably still got passed via trickery and treaties, but they are still trying to push these super restrictive copyright acts. As far as like super restrictive laws go too, Turkey, it's not video game related, but Turkey is basically refusing to allow, I think Finland or Sweden, they allowed one and not the other because somebody in that country burned the Quran, and so the Turkey president is basically saying you have to make it illegal to burn the Quran, or we won't let you in NATO, and effectively allow you to be vulnerable. NATO's rules of anybody can veto anybody is just a terrible rule in the first place, and the only real solution is for them to write a new charter, or form a new alliance, a group of 7, group of 8. I mean, that's really where it kind of just boils down anyways, is that regardless of whether you're a NATO member or not, if you've got most of the members except for Turkey on your side, you're effectively pretty safe. But yeah, no democracy is going to work when you allow everybody to veto everybody else, and then there's this capability of political wrangling. Imagine if the United States presidents were selected that way, where all the electors or all the senators and congressmen could veto any pick for United States president. It would be a nightmare more than it already is. But yeah, that is a risk, certainly, as far as censorship increasing. Would also say, as far as censorship increasing, some former employee or current employee has given an interview from Valve, and in a lot of ways they just kind of confirmed what I already knew, that there's definitely a lot of people in Valve that would like to censor more games, and it is very possibly that it is Gabe Newell's libertarian views, for the most part, that are keeping that from happening, despite the fact that there are many instances in which people have managed to still censor some games, particularly anime style looking games, from being released on Steam. So obviously Gabe Newell's not looking over everything, and some people are making arguments or just getting away with doing things in that crazy structure that they have. Their structure is just terrible. The diversity in Valve is terrible because the only people that are hired are already well-established, successful people, so you can't hire anybody like new at Valve anyway, so you couldn't possibly say, hey, here's one candidate that is a white male and here's another candidate that's a minority, and they both have no experience, so let's go with the minority and get a diversity of culture and thought in our company. They only go, we only will hire people who have been working in the industry for 30 years. And guess what? Racism existed 30 years ago, so there's only white males in the game industry. And so they've created this catch-22 as an excuse to have basically no diversity. Generally, they have this hidden structure of cronyism and stack ranking, which is crazy that they have something that's even close to stack ranking, considering how much Gabe Newell said he hated that, and that's why he left Microsoft. But apparently, it still managed to make its way into Valve. And Valve is just like a weird company where you succeed by getting people to like you instead of actually creating products or in any way having some like bug fixing aspects or anything like that. You just need to have big ideas and have more meetings with people, and the more meetings you're with people, the more FaceTime you get with people, and the more FaceTime you get with people, the more you have a chance of getting people to be favorable to you. And it also creates Valve apparently creates a lot of value in just looking right, and so shooting down an idea and being negative is way safer than proposing an idea and being positive, or supporting an idea and being positive, because you can just basically hide amongst the negative Nellies. Yeah, so Valve's not a good company. I mean, it really isn't. It's pretty obvious that that's the case when you look at just the lack of production as far as games. And they've only succeeded because they've gotten incredibly lucky as far as releasing making Valve and Valve succeeding. And then inherently this is the same problem with like Burger King or Walmart. Whoever's like first or second to the market tends to succeed no matter what. And it's often just incredibly undeserved success. I would say Valve is for the most part undeserved success. It's not even like, if you were to compare Steam to Amazon.com, it's not like Steam is a particularly great storefront. It's pretty limited. It hasn't really updated its looks in quite a long time. Only recently have they started to hint at experiments and to slightly change their storefront. Over the past 3 or 4 years, the new features they've added are just like discovery queues, and that's kind of it. It's just a couple different ways to potentially try and suggest old games to people. It's probably not worth your time, I'll say, to watch the entire documentary. If you want to, by all means, but it's not really going to tell you anything new unless you just don't know anything about Valve. Meanwhile, you can always live in hope, and maybe hope that with the success of the Steam Deck, that would create a wave of new people in charge with more authority, that possibly would start to push Valve in a different direction. But I don't know if I really trust any of that to really happen. Part of the major problem with Valve is the established shareholders, the established board, the people who are the shadow cabal, for lack of a better term, that are in charge of Valve, unless they just all started getting canceled, which even if they got canceled, I'm not sure they'd lose their job, or they started just retiring, which I guess there's a possibility there. Like, of course, it's never really a great situation when you're saying you have to just wait until a generation dies out to potentially see some change happen, because that's never really works. Because while you're waiting for one established generation to die out or retire out, you're still having the existing workers learn the culture that is already established and perpetuate that culture and become accustomed to that culture. Alright, let's start going through the Video Game Chronicle articles. Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning Studio is working on a high-profile THQ Nordic IP. Some of these articles are going to be repeated from the last stream because of my macro breaking. Let's wait. Let's wait until this guy summons. Phil Spencer claims 343 is critically important to Halo despite a wave of cuts. I really disagree with that. Honestly, I think 343 should be just completely eliminated from the system, as it were, and that they should start over with just a new company in charge of making a new trilogy of Halo games. In a lot of ways, if they were to say that now would be the time to give it to somebody like Gearbox, that would be kind of a fine twist too. It's just to say, we need somebody, or they need somebody when making Halo to go in a different direction and at least have a chance of success, whereas it feels like 343 really hasn't made a single good like they really haven't made a single good Halo game in their tenure of making 3 or 4 Halo games. And of course that's coming from me, who hasn't played any of the Halo games, so I have no idea if what I'm saying is true or not, but that's my general feeling, is that like you had Bungie doing Halo Reach, and then everything after Halo Reach didn't seem to really be well received. Particularly the most recent Halo not being well received. And honestly, if you handed over 343 to making remakes of the original games, that way they couldn't screw it up that much, or just supervising remakes of the games, and then you handed over the continuation of the series to somebody else, that would be interesting too. I think we had already talked about the PlayStation Plus Essential Games being leaked, so we won't cover that again. eShop update could point to an Advanced Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp release. This was delayed based on the war in Ukraine, because the game itself is around war and looks too much like Ukraine. Latest Mario movie clip, Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong. Hi-Fi Rush reportedly outperformed Forspoken on Steam. I don't think there's any report around that at this point. If anything, I could come over to this, reload this page. Since I did pin this page as far as Steam charts of DB, we can see that at the moment we're not seeing either one of those games. Yeah, one of them are particularly high on the list. Binding of Isaac Rebirth still getting like 61%. Dead Space remake just being sold as Dead Space. Guess Balloons Tower Defense 6 is apparently popular enough. Yep. It's kind of interesting to see how many games here are games that you would think nobody is playing, and the truth is that there is just an audience there, and they are just playing those games. Right. Summon that. Are these two gonna do anything? This guy's gonna take his sweet time. So my hope here is to have 2 extra Zodiac cards, then get Trident, then activate Trident to destroy the face down cards, which I think he can do. Then we'll use Borbo as just a safety measure. Nope. You can't destroy face down cards. Well, thank goodness I had a backup card to sacrifice. That does mean I'll do 100 less damage here, but whatever. Yeah, for starting late, today feels like a pretty relaxed experience. Yeah, and I have to attribute that to just sleeping in. I'm feeling kind of good about sleeping in. So should I activate this now? Let's do it. Activate this now, destroy those 2 cards. Then activate this. And toss this. Put this face up. Activate this. Grab this. And he'll just surrender and let me win. Good. We are low in the rank, so it's not surprising that we're winning here. But for time management, I think I probably would, if I'm not careful, just ride victories and continuously play. So yeah, I think we need to stop here as far as playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Because this is going to just take too long. Fusion summon, Pendulum summon, Link summon one more time in the next 26 days. And if anything, I probably shouldn't accomplish even this goal, because this goal is annoying to try and finish in solo mode. Yeah, wait 26 days. I don't know why it's specifically 26 days. It seems a few days short of that. Yeah, this is, well, we're at day 2 of 28 days, I guess. Alright. So I thought I was going to do something cool here, but in the top 100 list, I don't see Forspoken or the other game, Hi-Fi Rush. So if I type in hi, we can see Hi-Fi Rush is here at an all-time peak of 6,132 players according to SteamDB. which that's not that many. And then if I type in Forspoken, 12,500. All-time peak. So yeah, doesn't seem to me like that the numbers really line up according to SteamDB. Does look like currently there are more people playing, but this game here overall seems to have gotten half as many players. And this is by SteamDB, so who knows if that's accurate or not. So this might be more of an example of mainstream video game journalism being bad or being intentionally being ignorant. They're saying it made more revenue than the Square Enix title, which I don't know how that could be the case unless there's microtransactions in Hi-Fi Rush and not in Forspoken. One thing I did hear about Forspoken for the littles, anybody really should care about it, is that they make the character a kind of unlikable thief at the beginning, and so you really wouldn't even get deep into the game, deep enough into the game to the point where you'd actually like her. Capcom says it's set to sell a record number of games for a fiscal year. Expects to have sold more than 40 million units in April, which is okay, great. However, there is a complaint I am going to certainly have to make about the Resident Evil 4 remake. Sony launches live from PS5 marketing. It says it's much easier to buy a PS5 now. Sony's new PS5 ad could be teasing an Uncharted game. It's a possibility. It's a possibility it could be any kind of adventure game. I'm surprised there aren't more adventure games. I definitely thought about playing Indiana Jones as the next game instead of Legend of Bumbo, too. I have a couple of Indiana Jones games I want to play, but I thought Legend of Bumbo could balance better with Dicey Dungeons. I've forgotten whatever chain of comparisons of games before that, so if I was trying to work towards a comparison of a different game and played Dicey Dungeon as a mental washer, it did such a good job that it made me forget what other game I played before then. I couldn't even really tell you what it was. Nintendo's next Kirby remaster could have an extra chapter according to a leaked box. Episode 4 of Last of Us teases Hunters. This is all old news. Amazon reportedly wants to turn Tomb Raider into a Marvel-like franchise. DC, I guess that's as good a point as anywhere. The guy who's in charge of DC now came out and laid down his plans as far as what he wants to do with DC. He basically wants everything to be connected, and he wants the voice actors in the voice actors in the games and cartoons to be the actors in the movies, or vice versa. I suppose is probably more the case. So you're going to have really non-specialist actors, face actors, who are going to show up in the movie and look good and look the role, and then you're going to put them in a bad position to be voice actors in cartoons, which are going to probably pay less, and so they're going to try and write some really weird contracts that I think will probably lose them a lot of opportunities to force somebody to like these big old package deals of potentially 5 movies and 2 cartoons and 5 video games. And yeah, those face actors are just not going to be as good as professional established voice actors for video games, and this is going to lose work for voice actors for video games, and so I don't like that. I didn't like the idea that it seems like the guy in charge of DC, I want to say his name is James Gunn, but I'm not sure. He's like handwriting some of this. And so instead of being the person in charge who's not doing anything creative, he's also creating his own things, which inevitably he's going to like more and focus more on. So anything he writes is going to get this special treatment, and that's going to drive whatever this new DC cinematic or multimedia universe, I guess you'd call it a multimedia universe, like his own personal biases are going to drive what that universe looks like. Whereas if you can say one thing nice about Disney owning Marvel is that they really are only interested mostly in views and making money. So anything that's bad and poorly received isn't going to get a sequel. Whereas it certainly could have been much worse as far as the Marvel universe, in which the Captain Marvel movie, which that was really the first majorly bad Marvel movie, was when they introduced Captain Marvel, and nobody liked that. Had Marvel really just committed to that and pushed her and continued to push her, and you would just see her as the character that is overly focused on nonstop, that would have almost certainly ruined the Marvel universe. There are still certainly some problems with the Marvel universe, in that some of the movies and Disney Plus stuff is just not getting enough budget or getting enough quality writers on it. There is always a lack of quality writers in Hollywood, I would say, in general. I definitely have to wonder about the budgets of DC as far as how they really are going to be able to afford everything they're doing now that they're owned by AT&T. And I definitely have to wonder about whether you can, as the creators, as the people in charge of DC, they can care about their comics enough to really try and integrate them into a multimedia universe, and that they would actually promote comics. Remember, the Marvel movies have never tried to integrate the Marvel stories really into the movies, or even promote or sell Marvel comics. So if they are going to try to do a better job than that, that would be interesting, but I don't know if they're going to do it particularly well. Inevitably, it feels like they're going to have to do another DC reboot. They've called it, I think, Gods and Monsters as far as the first chapter name of this multimedia universe, as far as just, this is the chapter that we're focusing on, this is the theme that we're focusing on, instead of just calling it something like Series 1, which is what Marvel did, which that probably doesn't mean much of anything. They are trying to bring in the Authority from Wildstorm as a bigger focus in some of their Wildstorm properties, which, I mean, maybe just gives them a way of making more superhero movies that are around parodies of Superman and characters like that, instead of making 2 or 3 Superman movies in a row. They're basically canceling everything on CW and starting over, and just starting over with everything. So yeah, it's all gonna really be the proof in the pudding and the devil in the details, as it were, as far as just how well they implement it. And it inherently still just has the problems with DC that DC always has, in that there's pretty much only a focus around Batman and not much success around anything other than Batman. Maybe you get some Superman and Wonder Woman. They're going to make like a Supergirl movie, which is very ambitious, since the last Supergirl movie from several decades ago was so awful that they stopped making women superheroes for a decade. And then they started again with like the Wonder Woman movie. And then they're going to have more of an emphasis on labeling things as Elseworlds if they're not canonically in that connected universe. So they definitely create a back door in which anything that they don't want to make canon, they will just say is an Elseworld, and they may very quickly retroactively label something as being an Elseworlds story instead of it being canon if it doesn't sell well. They want to do TV also, and they've got some Green Lanterns TV show in production, which, okay, I guess that works pretty well since the Green Lanterns are set mostly outside of Earth anyway, so them being in a smaller budget, small TV show might work, but it doesn't work particularly well because you need a lot of special effects around Green Lanterns, more than most superheroes. But for the most part, they didn't announce any video game stuff, so it really isn't that much video game news yet. It might be. I could potentially think of all the characters in the DC universe and all of the ones that I would like to see a video game made around it, but there isn't anything. I guess I'm not really a DC comic book fanboy or anything, so there's not anything that I really care about that much. It might be interesting, certainly, if you were to make a good playing game and then slap Swamp Thing as the character instead of some just weird monster character. Or if you were to make a good playing game and slap Batman in it, that's fine too. But the problem with Batman games most recently is that they've all been bad playing, and technically speaking, and just generally as far as their concepts. You could throw Superman in the game, but you have to do it very carefully because he's overpowered. You could throw Wonder Woman in a game, but you have to kind of be careful about that because she's a little overpowered. There doesn't seem like there's going to be any emphasis on like Constantine, even though there is a Constantine 2 movie I think is maybe going to get made, bringing back the guy who was in the Constantine 1 movie, not the CW Constantine actor. But yeah, they aren't going in the dark direction as far as magic. It seems like it doesn't seem like they're going deep into their canon either, as far as characters, which probably makes some sense. But yeah, right now it's not very much video game news, so I talked way too much about it. Moving on, Video Games Chronicles says February's Xbox Live games with gold titles have been announced. Let's see, this might be new news. Ages of Empire 2 Definitive Edition, Hi-Fi Rush, and GoldenEye 007. People pretty much stopped talking about GoldenEye 007 pretty quickly. Let's see. Inkulanadi and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R all will be added January 31st. Darkest Dungeon and Grid Legends on February 2nd. Hot Wheels Unleashed on February 7th. See. Dead Space's UK physical launch week sells less than half of the Callisto Protocols. EA's remake topped last week's software sales charts, while Forspoken debuted at number 4. Interesting. And I don't know if that's wrong either. In a lot of ways, it probably shouldn't be a case that a remake of a relatively new game could sell as well as a brand new game that had a lot of hope and potential around it. This may be certainly a problem as far as getting a Dead Space 2 remake or continuation, but I kind of feel like the I kind of feel like they're a little committed here, and they had just too much success with the Dead Space remake to give up on it. So I imagine EA will probably announce a Dead Space 2 of some sort that will remake the second game in 2 to 4 years. They might take their time with it, certainly. Might even be 5 years, but eventually I am assuming they will release a Dead Space 2 remake or completely different game just called Dead Space 2. Whereas I question whether we see a Callisto Protocol 2 at all. Although there is a small potential that if they kept just chiseling at it and kept on improving Callisto Protocol, that 2 years in, it might be a completely different game that is way better in the way it controls and plays. It still would have problems with its story, certainly. It was not a good launch game, certainly for a new series. Let's see. Ubisoft is set to reveal The Crew on Tuesday, which is a racing game. Halo transmedia boss Kiki Wolfkill has seemingly left 343 Industry. It's funny when you have a picture of people in the game instead of the person you're actually talking about. Kiki Wolfkill sounds like a fake name, but I assume it's real. It might be a case that these are employees, and this might be Kiki, or this might be Kiki, that might be Kiki, that might be Kiki, but it's hard to tell. Yeah. So here you have a picture down here. She's been at 343 for at least 14 years, so that's not a super crazy time to say it's time to move on. So yeah, that might be Kiki there, that might be Kiki there, that might be Kiki there. As far as just that. At a certain point, it's crazy to say it, but it might be better as more talented people, if there are any talented people at 343, and it's kind of impossible to tell who is talented and who isn't from the outside looking in. But if the good talent leaves 343 and gets reassigned at some other point in Microsoft, then they could form a new team and shake off all the rust, shake off all the bad employees, and potentially create something new and better, and maybe go on to make a completely different type of game that's good. Or she could be one of the bad employees herself, and she could have straight up been shifted off to an unimportant position, or straight up let go, or retired, quit herself. She was an executive producer on Halo 4 before spending 8 years in her most recent role, where she oversaw the launch of the Halo TV show. So, if she was in charge of the Halo TV show, the Halo TV show was pretty bad. So, you kind of have to think that she might be some of the bad employees. It could also be it could also be that she is just being moved around to be more of a TV exec and less of a video game exec. There's an update here that says they understand Wolfkill remains as an executive producer on the Halo TV series and is expanding her role to encompass all Xbox IPs. So she may just be the person in charge of turning all Microsoft games into TV series. And maybe, hopefully, you can only hope she learned from the Halo TV series, and we'll see TV adaptations that are better around Microsoft properties. That being said, I wouldn't really have a lot of hope for any Microsoft game to be a good TV production in the first place. Like, what would you do if you were to try to make a Skyrim TV show? It's too open-ended. If you were to make a Perfect Dark TV show, maybe that would work. Crackdown TV show probably would blow the budget on special effects. Some of the Double Fine games certainly could be turned into TV shows, and that would be a little weird. But I really would have to look at a list of everything Microsoft owns as far as parent companies. Prey, the new Prey reboot, that wasn't really a reboot, it was just a different game by the same name. That could probably be turned into a TV series. Dishonored could be turned into a TV series. Doom, you could try it. Certainly it'd probably fail. They do have a lot of big recognizable names if they can figure out a way to turn it into a TV series. Although, again, they pretty much miserably failed from what I heard from reviews as far as the Halo TV show, which just did not have the running and gunning that would have been necessary in a Halo TV show. Halo was a terrible decision in the first place. There's just no way you're going to be able to have that much running and gunning in a live action TV show. It would get too exhausting by episode 5 of just shootout after shootout after shootout. Yeah, it might have worked fine as a movie if you could just have a two-hour action movie with lots of shooting, but trying to stretch it for season after season requires way more dialogue than a silent protagonist like Master Chief can provide. And even if you're not making a TV show around Master Chief, Halo is established as having silent protagonists regardless, so you can't provide that much dialogue. Moving on, MLB The Show 23 cover star release date and Game Pass launch has been confirmed. Check out Video Games Chronicle if you want to see this information. I don't care about it enough to go further. There are sources that Nintendo and PlayStation will not be attending E3 in 2023, but the organizers say it's received a tremendous amount from the biggest companies in the industry. Now, it's also worth mentioning that technically, I don't think Microsoft has been a part of E3 for many years. It's just that Microsoft owns a stage that is directly across the street from E3 and does presentations at the exact same time. So they're effectively leeching off or piggybacking that presentation. Now, when you look at it somewhat objectively, it probably doesn't change the scale or what you would see at E3 that much to not have any of the major publishers there, with maybe the exception of Nintendo, who is a first-party publisher much more than PlayStation and Microsoft. So if Nintendo doesn't have any kind of booth at all, instead of just usually having a giant booth and an entire stage presentation, then any first-party Nintendo titles will just not be shown on the floor at all. Whereas if PlayStation or Microsoft don't have any booths on the floor of E3, well, all of those companies that are under Microsoft and PlayStation, all those companies they own, will have their own individual booths anyway, so you'll still be able to see those games. There will be like a Bethesda ZeniMax booth. Well, maybe that's a bad example because I don't think they actually did have a booth because they did their own thing. There probably would be like a Double Fine booth. There probably would be well, I can't even name some of the Sony ones, but since it is new organizers, it's the same people that run the PAX events, what I imagine is happening here is that there's not a big focus on big stage presentations at the beginning of this E3, and instead it is much more of a focus of having more medium to small booths showing off like one game instead of a major stage presentation or a huge booth that is showing off 3 or 4 games for Microsoft. And I wouldn't be surprised if this E3 really is going to try to feel a lot more like PAX, and is going to really try to pander more to fans of video games going to the event and less of developers who, for the most part, aren't fans of video games going to PAX to have meetings, or going to E3 to have meetings. Like, it's very questionable how many of those meetings need to happen at E3 when you could just Skype everything. Like, there is something to be said about having meetings face to face and not having technical problems and delays, and just being able to react instantaneously to people's facial expressions. But most of those meetings that happened at E3 were secretly being done in hotel rooms anyway, so they weren't actually connected to the floor presentation of E3 anyways. So E3 has this major struggle in which it has to stand on its own as a product if it's going to survive, and it can't just be the central excuse for presentations that aren't affiliated actually with E3 to happen, or for meetings between developers and publishers to happen in hotel rooms at the same time. Also, E3 has the worst problem in which it needs to be massively profitable because it funds the ESA, and without it, then the ESA as a lobbying group runs out of money, which arguably the ESA is just going to have to start a different scheme for getting money. And anyways, it's going to have to charge more for rating things, or make companies pay dues, higher dues, and something around that. Otherwise, the ESA is going to go away. And I don't think we're quite to the point where we could get rid of the ESA and just have everybody self-regulate themselves and give themselves their own ratings. Even though that would be kind of nice on some aspects, it would eventually just lead to the government creating a government body that censors and rates video games instead of an independent body that censors and rates video games, neither of which are good. Technically, I guess if there was a government body, you could argue in court cases, freedom of speech reasons, why they shouldn't be able to censor things, but probably wouldn't succeed very quickly. Moving on, Sony has reportedly cut its PlayStation VR 2 launch forecast in half. But then the update here is PlayStation has denied claims that disappointing pre-orders have seen it reduce production. So they're just denying it. So here's the update. Has not cut PlayStation VR 2 production numbers. The fact that Video Games Chronicles has 2 articles fairly close to each other where there's an update, and the update is, nope, they've totally denied what you're saying, really goes to show that either Bloomberg or Video Games Chronicles themselves, who really aren't doing much to vet their data and make sure it's accurate. But between the two of them, you've got just bad journalism here. You shouldn't have to put this many updates / retractions. And it's not even real retractions. It's just like, alright, well, they've denied it. This is a weird story to me. Xbox Series X and Series S are getting a price increase in Japan. Already these consoles are super unpopular in Japan. Increasing the price is not going to help that. Microsoft says, quote, it was a difficult decision to make. So now to get it, it will be the Series X goes from $421 to $460. Series S goes from $247 to $291. So it's roughly $40 an increase. That's a lot. Although, come to think of it, that may not be that expensive compared to buying it in America. Isn't it close to $500 anyways to get an Xbox Series X? There definitely could be a weakness in the yen, and that would be accounting for the changes, but yeah. Nobody likes to see price increases, and I don't think that's going to increase the sales. Like, there is probably some very rare scenarios where if a product was too cheap, people would see it as cheap and not want to purchase it. Like if I saw a computer for $100, I would have to assume it's a garbage computer and not worth owning. So if they raised it from $100 to like $500, then I might consider purchasing that computer. But for consoles in particular, I don't think that would be really the case. There's enough people who have already shown the performance of the Xbox Series X in particular. The Series S is pretty weak. That it's not going to increase the sales any by increasing the price. It'll almost certainly decrease the sales. Moving on, the Twisted Metal TV show will seemingly air this year, which, yeah, this is probably going to be the TV show that they need to just release and get out so that Sony and just video game TV shows in general can move forward. If anything, this is probably going to be a TV show that really is going to fail in comparison to the Last of Us TV show. Unless it can just go in a very different way, in a very silly way. I still very much feel like it's ridiculous that they want to make video game TV adaptations anyways. It just makes the video games worse, not better. I don't even really believe that the Last of Us TV show is better than the Last of Us video game. I don't think anybody's trying to make that argument or making that argument. Also, I feel like even on HBO, with the success of The Last of Us, I don't know if you're getting more than maybe 5 or 10% of HBO's viewership to watch that show who haven't already played the game or are aware of the game. I think a lot of people certainly will say, oh, it's based on a video game. Well, then forget it. I'm not going to play it. I'm not going to watch it. They basically had to hide, or at least under advertise, the fact that The Walking Dead was based on a comic book to make it somewhat successful, and really isn't even based on a comic book that much. The Japanese government, I believe, registered the A-Day. I don't think it's today. 31st of January 1997 was when Final Fantasy VII came out, and they registered it as Final Fantasy VII Day, which, yeah, fake holiday type thing. I'm sure it really doesn't mean anything at all. If anything, it probably just reminds people that Final Fantasy VII remake is still waiting for part 2, and reminds people that Final Fantasy VII is something that they like, whereas most recent Final Fantasy games are not as well received. February's Apple Arcade games include Team 17's USA's Farmside, which Team 17 making different types of games instead of Worms games. I think that's what they were known for before. This doesn't look like much of a game. It also joins Castle Crumble and new versions of Riptide GP, Renegade, and Lifeline. Episode 3's HBO Last of Us had the highest audience ratings yet, so the ratings are just going up and up and up. Okay. But very noticeably, Viewers were up 12% from the previous week. Noticeably here, you're having a lot of flashbacks and a lot of just like talking and TV show stuff. It's not something that feels like a video game in any way. I'm not seeing any guns, I'm not seeing any clickers, I'm not seeing any like post-apocalyptics in these 3 screenshots. Let's see. Marvel Snap's battle mode is now available. The first series drop, which alters the rarity of some cards, is also now live. I'm not sure what the battle mode does. I didn't see it when I was playing it earlier today. Let's see. Lets players battle in friendly or competitive matches against specific people, which if you can do competitive matches against specific people, then you can cheat pretty easily. Kind of feels like that should have been available on day one. And then making cards more collectible will be nice, but I still feel like there's going to be a subsection of highly rare cards that are just going to be impossible to get. Plus, you're going to have a ridiculous amount of variants, and I just don't think there's any way to get all the variants and be free to play. You're going to have to pay through the nose to try to get all the variants. Which you get a benefit of having more variants, because then that gives you the chance of upgrading more things to get more collection score, to get more things to get more collection score over and over and over again. Let's see. Ubisoft has announced the Crew Motorfest for release this year, which, okay, that seems a little short notice as far as announcements. And visually, I wouldn't say this looks amazingly good by modern standards. You got kind of a blurry background here, and you're not seeing massive amounts of detail. Maybe they're trying to do some motion blur, but even at that, it just doesn't seem like this is a particularly high resolution image or particularly well rendered image. Halo Infinite Story DLC reportedly not planned. New online Halo game said to use the Unreal Engine. If anything, that's probably a smart move. And then 343 Industries reportedly lost at least 95 employees in the recent Microsoft job cuts. So, if Halo Infinite Story DLC is not planned, is there any story at all in Halo Infinite? I'm not sure. I kind of vaguely recall that they launched without any story, but at some point Halo Infinite maybe added some story. Again, this is according to Bloomberg, and they are certainly taking Bloomberg at their word, when twice now we've seen updates and denials from what Bloomberg has to say. They were using the Slipspace engine, which is probably an engine they own, and it is reportedly buggy and difficult to use, continuing due to the game's troubled production, according to sources said to be familiar with the development. One of the things to really point out about video game development and why the Unreal Engine is so successful and popular is because even if you do have an internal engine that Microsoft owns and doesn't have to pay a license to, and you would prefer to use that, it locks you into having your own team be trained and hopefully be skilled at using that internal engine. Whereas if you just make something in the Unreal Engine, then you can go to any third-party assistive developer and say, we need you to make 5 of our 15 levels for us, and since it's in the Unreal Engine, you already know how to program in the Unreal Engine, and you can make those levels quickly. I would imagine you probably would want features to be mostly created and functionality to be mostly programmed in-house, but level design certainly you could give to third-party people. Although it is definitely possible in the case of 343 that they were so bad at making Halo Infinite using the Slip Space engine that had they handed all of the code over to a third-party developer, the third-party developer in the Unreal Engine would have been able to optimize and improve all of the functionality and features too. It really is an argument for there being an open source game engine that was even better than the Unreal Engine, and everybody should use that. But unfortunately, there is no such thing. Microsoft themselves could do that. They could open source the Slip Space engine and then really make an effort to push more people to improve upon it and optimize it, and then all of a sudden an open source Slip Space engine becomes the de facto engine everybody uses. Then also Epic Games is in trouble because people aren't using the Unreal Engine so much. Although so many games are made in the Unreal Engine, it would still be relevant for at least a decade from now. But yeah, Microsoft's in a good position to potentially do that. PlayStation probably has their own internal engine amongst the companies they own, that they could pick the best of that and open source it. EA, 2K, Embracer Group, all of those companies probably have an internal engine that if any one of them just open sourced it, one of them, it would create a much more connected system. Particularly when you already know that the next level down below this Slip Space engine is still just going to be DirectX, and pretty much all game development for PC is done with DirectX, or possibly they're moving away from DirectX and using things like Metal, which might not really need DirectX, but I don't know if any games are really succeeding in being programmed without DirectX at the moment. Moving on, here's a first look at the Warzone 2's Resurgence map, Ashika Island. Check out that Video Games Chronicle article if you're interested. Let's see, Microsoft has announced plan to delist various games from the Xbox 360 marketplace. The titles and associated DLC will be removed in early February, so I have to assume the contracts are just out. Varies per region. 46 games will be removed in the US, 44 in the UK. It includes games like Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, Dark Souls, Far Cry, Left 4 Dead, Mass Effect, Prince of Persia, Skate, Splinter Cell, and the Witcher series. If anything, this looks to me like these are all games that probably already have updated versions, and so they are just getting rid of the old redundant versions of these games, or particularly they're taking them off the storefront for the Xbox 360, which it's a little surprising that they're even supporting the Xbox 360 store. Anyways, these titles will no longer be purchasable on the Xbox 360 store only, and the titles that are available to be purchased on Xbox One and Xbox Series S stores will remain purchasable. You'll still be able to play discs or previously downloaded games on your Xbox 360 and modern consoles if they are backward compatible titles. So yeah, it's a little surprising that they are even bothering to support the Xbox 360 at that level. I wouldn't be surprised if by this time next year they start shutting down the 360 store completely. It probably is a slightly different contract between the Xbox 360 store and the Xbox One and Series X, Series S stores. Yeah. It definitely is a case where if you have an Xbox 360 at this point and you have a decent amount of games, which I did, and I actually gave them away, and unfortunately I think I'm going to have to also give the people I gave it away to an Xbox Series X to do this, because yeah, they won't get one otherwise. the move here is to get an Xbox Series X. Put all those discs into the 360 discs into the Xbox Series X, and hope that most, if not all, of those games are backward compatible, and that you get to play them that way. The actual Xbox 360 hardware at this point is getting to be pretty useless. Let's see. Moving on, EA is canceling Apex Legends Mobile and Battlefield Mobile, which, if anything, I guess this is probably good news. Less bad mobile games is probably a good idea. And I doubt that I really have a lot of faith in EA making mobile games. EA barely makes any games at all. Epic's Rumbleverse is shutting down after just 6 months, which I guess I totally forgot about this game because I don't recognize it at all. This was like a run around the world in this kind of Mexican wrestler type themed fighting for some of the characters and fighting amongst each other. EA says FIFA 23 is on track to be the biggest title in the franchise's history. EA must have had a shareholder meeting. They say the North American unit sales are up 50% year over year, which what happened last year, I guess, would be the question there as far as what games were released. New Resident Evil, or they're just calling it Resi 4 remake details have been revealed, life combat, side quest, Ashley sections, and more. So, what I'm going to hit on the head here is that it doesn't look like Resident Evil 4 in a lot of points here. And you're going to have to take that or leave that. Certainly, the amount of hair detail is different, but a bearded villager grabbing you by the throat, there really wasn't a character that quite looked like that. Your menu here, the heads-up display, is weird because I don't think you really had a heads-up display at all in Resident Evil 4, and that was part of the plan, is to keep it clean. You didn't, maybe you had some bullets or something, but now it seems like there's going to be quick swaps. No, there was a heads-up display because you had your whole health aspect. So there might be like a health bump button so you can instantly heal. You've got some QuickTime events, although weirdly it seems like there's 2 different QuickTime events happening at the same time. This looks a little bit more like Resident Evil 4, but still you're in this different looking jacket. Let's see if we can get this video to actually play. The main problem though, and honestly I have to put on a tinfoil hat at this point and just scream conspiracy, is there seems to be either failure to render females in particular to look like a attractive human being, or an intentional effort to make female characters look unattractive. And I can't 100% dismiss the tinfoil hat theory that there might be meetings that have been made amongst game developers to push it so that females characters look unattractive. And when you see Ashley in here, which I hope you do see Ashley in here, she looks completely different and, for lack of a better term, ugly. It's not just that they put her in different clothing or made her a little bit chubby. The entire face just seems old and ugly. We saw this also in Dead Space. It's silly and sounds ridiculous to bang the drum on this complaint, but man, I would prefer we go back to just sexist producers if that means the final product has attractive looking people. Same is true in Hollywood. Like, when you go to watch a movie, when you go to play a game, you want the characters, for the most part, to be attractive, to be ridiculously attractive, to be unrealistically attractive, because this isn't reality. And even Leon was supposed to be a bit of a pretty boy, and in this he's a little bit less attractive looking, although still pretty well. And what's funny about this too is this Resident Evil game, it's coming from Capcom, so you would have a Japanese person in charge, so there would probably be a little bit more sexism in that. Let's just not beat around the bush. There is a fairly high amount of bias towards attractiveness amongst old white Japanese, well, I guess old Japanese people in charge of Capcom, unless it's a case that Capcom has literally given up all production notes to the West, and the West is making this remake, which I don't know if that's the case or not. What's funny is that we're looking at this trailer, which I think this is just the old trailer. Even the village females look kind of attractive, more than Ashley does. And it's just like a shame that you can't have an attractive character. I don't think that they ever really went too crazy with the Rule 34 with Ashley anyways, probably more than some people would like, but she wasn't a super popular character that people loved for years after that. If anything, she was always kind of an annoying character. We haven't seen Ada Wong, or I haven't seen Ada Wong yet. There was a cosplay image that came out, not around Resident Evil 4, but kind of runs into the same issue, where one of the cosplayers was playing a character who is particularly short and moe from an anime series, and the cosplayer herself is particularly short in contrast to another cosplayer who is particularly tall, and they on Reddit had to come out as like the first pinned comment and say that both of the cosplayers are 22, so I guess quit reporting it as being underage, which is funny because they were both cosplaying in bunny suits, but there was no nudity, a little bit of nudity, but like it's kind of sad that you have to say the age of a cosplayer when they aren't even in a... Yeah, this is just moved on to a different video. So that's the wrong script. That was the wrong video. Well, that was not helpful. But yeah, it's kind of ridiculous that there's just this problem. Like, and at a certain level, I kind of get it. There is an argument, certainly, to say that kids shouldn't be allowed to cosplay as anything, but they totally want to do that, and do that. They dress up as Batman, and every Halloween, kids are cosplaying as their favorite superheroes, and a small percentage of that will want to get into cosplay at other times. And their costumes should be appropriate, but if they want to play a character in a bunny suit, then that's not that extreme. Not to the point where pictures should be flagged. Yeah, they really are just pushing the limits as far as making less and less acceptable as far as artistic creation or artistic intent. But in this remake, I guess my argument more is that I do not like the artistic intent of some of the things I've seen in Resident Evil 4. I still almost certainly will play the game and just whine about it when it shows up. But that'll be... but yeah, it definitely seems like there's this uglyification of females, and that's just never something that's going to happen in Hollywood. And it's not something Hollywood is held to. It's not something TV is held to. It's not something any kind of paintings or digital art or books are held to. That it's always been a case that Hercules was depicted as the strongest, most muscly person, and Aphrodite was always the most beautiful person ever, or Cleopatra was the most beautiful queen ever. Like, we have thousands of years of history in which when characters are made up or talked about, they are always depicted as being superhuman in their beauty, whatever that description of beauty is. There definitely have been times where being a little chubbier was attractive, certainly, but usually the face was always considered attractive, even when it was chubby, when it was depicted. Whereas the faces of Ashley and the girlfriend in Dead Space, it's just old. It's just, there's no way you're gonna like it. Even if you were into MILFs or GILFs, like, these faces are not done in such a way to be attractive for their age. But I think that's enough of that rant, so let's move on. I had already talked about the rebooted DC Universe, planning to use the same actors for games, films, and TV. Which, yeah. They want to feature the same canon and storylines across all mediums. That's going to probably not work very well, because you're going to inherently try to put out a DC movie that millions of people see and connect it to a DC comic series that maybe 10,000 people read. The numbers are just not going to be balanced like that. It's going to create a situation where the comics are going to increasingly have nothing important happen in them, which, in all fairness, nothing important ever does happen in comics anyways, but it's just going to become blatantly obvious that they have to keep the appearance and the lineup of characters the same. You can't kill off the Joker in a comic book because you want to bring the Joker back in a TV series or movie. You've got to kill him off in the movie and then bring him back in the next movie, or kill him off in the TV series in the next movie. Even movies and TV are going to have differences in viewing, particularly based on where the TV show is airing. If it's a TV show on HBO Plus, it's going to get much fewer viewers than something that would be free over the air on CW. Moving on, the Sega Astro City Mini is now available across Europe. I haven't even heard of this toy. Well, I would have thought at this point Sega would have been out of making these little mini toys, particularly with the part shortage and all, but apparently not. Let's see. Redfall will require an online connection even in single player. Bethesda confirms it's been a long time since anybody has tried to pull this trick. And that sucks, certainly. That feels like Microsoft definitely trying to once again push towards an always connected universe. Let's see. And I can't really see why. What's funny is that they came out and said, stop comparing Redfall to Left 4 Dead. It's much closer to Far Cry than it is Left 4 Dead. Which that just really confuses me at that point. It's like, so I have no idea what Redfall really is. And yeah, they are doing an absolute awful job of advertising what Redfall is, since so many people look at it and think it's Left 4 Dead. Let's see. The Hogwarts Legacy launch trailer is here ahead of next week's release. I guess check that out if you're interested. I do think Hogwarts Legacy might just be the surprise hit of the next month. WWE 2K23's first gameplay trailer shows War Games mode in action. This is a new 2-ring mode. It is one of the team's major additions. I've never even seen this. is this something that they've actually done in wrestling, where they put two wrestling rings together? I mean, how does that really change it? Because it still just kind of feels like it's Hell in the Cell, but we've added two rings. If you get thrown out of one ring, or you're eliminated if you land in the other. But if anything, this is probably just an attempt to make a bigger ring without having to redo the spring at the middle of the ring, or redo any of the sizes and shapes of the equipment. Yeah. I really would have to know how War Games mode works for me to care about that. But it's kind of hard to care about wrestling at all, particularly if you don't care about it. And it's probably a little hard to care much about WWE at the moment, as it is potentially just going to be sold and changed drastically over in the near future. That is the suspicion, at least. A game called Tomb Raider Reloaded comes to mobile later this month. The version without ads and in-app purchases will also be available via Netflix. We are getting to the point where there is probably 2 or 3 Netflix games that I could install and I could install and play, but it would just be wasting more of my time because I couldn't make any footage around it. Unless I'm going to try and do an Android emulator and show off mobile games that way, but I don't really have any motivation to show off mobile games. I've got too many Steam games I want to play, and mobile games inherently are never that good. February's PlayStation Plus Essential Games have been announced. The last article was about them being leaked. So now there's an article just confirming or disproving some of those leaks. Let's see, Ollie Ollie World Mafia Definitive Edition, Evil Dead the Game, and Destiny 2 Beyond Light, which I assume is DLC. Yeah. Sony confirms it will remove the PlayStation Plus collection library in May. Those who redeem the 19 games will still be able to access them as long as they remain subscribers. So, is this like a bundle that they offered? The PlayStation Plus collection is a library of PS4 games given exclusively to PS5 owners who are also members of the paid service. It originally included 20 games before Persona 5 was removed in May of 2022. So they're just losing contracts again. Seems like it is just contract renewal time. All the contracts end in February or end in May, end in the first quarter of every year. Sony says God of War Ragnarok has sold 11 million copies in 3 months, which arguably is not as many as you would like. It would have been much nicer if they had said they had sold 20 million copies in 3 months. Warzone 2 Season 2 trailer shows off a new map, Ashika Island, which this is the second article from Video Games Chronicle around that. Then EA has reportedly canceled a single-player game codenamed Titanfall Legends. Which, okay. What does it really matter if something that you never even knew about gets canceled, even if it might have been a Titanfall game that people might have been interested in? It obviously didn't get very far into production and obviously wasn't that good. Now we're into the Gematsu articles. Games with gold for February being For the King and Guts and Goals. Disguise 7 is coming to the West in the fall for PS5, PS4, Switch, and PC. What's funny is, though, for all the announcements and trailers and more trailers and more trailers around Disguise 7, it never crossed my mind that it was only coming out in Japan. Which, in fairness for the Disguise series, it was always coming to the West. Like all the other games are available to the West, there's no reason why you wouldn't bring the newest game. Rhapsody Moral Kingdom Chronicles announced for the PS5 Switch and PC. This is Rhapsody 2 and Rhapsody 3 bundled for a new generation. That being said, Rhapsody 1 seems to be not available at the moment. It's a RPG game. Looks kind of old. Not super old, but kind of old. Also, it definitely just doesn't sound like a series I've ever heard about before. I would have kind of said it was a visual novel from the looks of it, but it's not that. You see, this animation style is pretty rough, and it's something you would expect in like the late 80s or even early 80s as far as an animation style, if you're going to call it anime at all. Let's see. It does definitely have more of a feel of being closer to Astro Boy than any of the moe art styles of modern times. Feels kind of like Paper Mario even inspired, which I wouldn't hate playing something that was a decent story and had a Paper Mario aspect to it, but I don't think I would go with a series that I've never heard of, playing the second and third game and not being able to play the first game. So that does create just a weird situation. Let's see. Disguise 7 Vows of the Virtuelist interview with the director creating a Japanese style netherworld. So this is a whole like special interview, which we get very few of these actual interviews with somebody versus just video game journalists repeating what other journalists have to say through leaks and through announcements and press releases. A game I've never heard of called Crime Site is going to end service on May 1st. It was a player versus player multiplayer mystery simulator. I think it was from Konami. So it's not super upsetting that Konami is abandoning a game that nobody really likes or that nobody's ever heard of. It's mostly negative now, so obviously people are upset now. But it would have been a little bit nicer, certainly, if these games were supported more. The release date here was in April 2022, and that does not really inspire confidence that any Konami game is going to be treated better or with any kind of respect. And so that does create this weird situation where if Konami makes some Silent Hill games, are they going to cancel any support for the Silent Hill games? Or are they going to support them better because it has Silent Hill in the name? Of course, I guess if you look at this, the all-time peak according to Steam DB of this game was only 572. And right now there is only 9 people online. So the game seems to be completely abandoned anyways. 452 positive reviewers when, 6,000 followers. I don't know if there's a real correlation between the number of positive reviews and the number of followers, but it does maybe make an argument that some of these positive reviews are fake too. I would not put that past Konami. This is inherently the problem of online games or player versus player games in the first place, is that they always die. And 100 years, 1,000 years in the future, we may have good backups of every single game that's ever been made, but you will not be able to play any of the online games that exist unless it's just been retrofitted to be still playable, and there's an actual fandom playing old online games, which odds are very low of that. We already talked about MLB The Show being announced for basically everything, although not PC. Theater Rhythm Final Bar demo launches February 1st, featuring 30 playable songs, most of which are from Final Fantasy, it seems. Let's see. Here's an update. Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo to skip E3. Update. See what the update says. The ESA has addressed IGN's report but does not confirm or deny the claims. So that they've addressed it by saying nothing, basically. And I'm not going to waste my time reading 4 paragraphs of a response that doesn't actually respond or confirm or deny anything. A game called Loop 8 Summer of the Gods has been delayed to June 1st on PS4, Xbox One, and Switch in Japan, and June 6th for PC. So just a delay for a game, a JRPG. Let's see, we talked about the price increases going up by 5,000 yen, which is a lot. Here's the Final Fantasy VII Day officially registered with the Japanese Anniversary Association, which I'm not sure if that actually is even a government agency or just a company that exists. Yeah, nobody probably cares enough to really investigate that further. Here's kind of a great example of using a stamp to sign documents instead of signing documents with your signature, which they claim is more secure in Japan just because they're stuck in their old ways, but it's insanely insecure, because anybody could steal a stamp and stamp anything and then make it an official signature that way, and you have to go through the process of having a stamp made in the first place. So somewhere out there, there's a company that can make a duplicate of your stamp easily. Plus, there's just no forensics you could really do on the stamp. Maybe you could look at the date of how much the carbon dating on the stamp has changed to get maybe a date, but that's not going to be particularly accurate. That might be within a few hundred, if not thousands of years if you're carbon dating. Ideally, what you would want is a signature and a thumbprint and possibly a drop of blood and some hair on official documents. But yeah, something that you could really get DNA off of to prove that this person was here and that they signed it still doesn't really prove that they are not signing it under distress. Like, ideally, you'd want a photo of the person signing it. But even at that, you could force somebody to stage a photo. So, best you can do is have witnesses, which I don't think I've ever seen a document actually needing witnesses to stamp things either in Japan. There is also that assumption, and this has nothing to do with video games, that Japanese people overall are just so moral and law-abiding that you wouldn't have any forgeries. Of course, that's not really true. It's just they like to pretend that that's the way it is. Moving on, Sword and Fairy 7 DLC Dreamlike World launches February 14th for PC and later for consoles as a free update. The Sword and Fairy series is, I believe, this is the first one released outside of China as a Chinese RPG. Definitely still feels very Chinese inspired. And let's see what the main game's reception is these days. 76%, 71% overall. For a Chinese game, that's pretty great. There are so many bad Chinese games like this that even getting 70s is pretty good. I'm holding them to basically lower standard. That being said, I don't know if I really would want to buy this game. It's on the wish list just because it follows the rules as to why it would be justified on the wish list, but comparing playing this to, say, Monster Hunter, I probably should play Monster Hunter, which is just more popular overall. This is also a single player game where it feels like it would have been an MMO. Them adding more content certainly helps improve that as far as free DLC. Power Wash Simulator free Final Fantasy VII collaboration DLC Midgar Special Pack was announced, which is funny to run around Final Fantasy VII in Power Wash things. But yeah, clearly Power Wash Simulator is just a new Visceral Cleanup Crew game, which that probably gives us a good timeline as far as how many of those games can be released and how big of a break do you need between those games. Because it probably was somewhere around 5 to 8 years when Viscera Cleanup Crew came out, and now we're getting Power Wash Simulator. And like, there was maybe a couple games in the middle there, but they weren't quite doing the same thing. Moving on, Komatsu says Love Live School Idol Festival is going to end service on March 31st. This was a smartphone game with some anime idol girls. Like, yeah, I guess that's what they call them, as idols. Grim Guardians Demon Purge physical editions for the PS5, PS4, and Switch will be published by P-Cube in the West, which probably doesn't mean much to most people, just to have that information. If you know a game is being released in the West, that's really all you care about. There probably are some publishers that do a pretty terrible job if you're in the know, but most people aren't in the know. This might be one of those games that also gets a little bit more censored by the publisher as they localize it, but probably not. Like, well, if you have a different publisher in the East and the West, you tend not to go through that major effort of localizing things twice and censoring it. You usually, if you have a publisher in the East, this is the game that's a Castlevania game, but it has, I think, the Galgun's girls in it, so it's a little bit more lewd, but I don't think it's actually that lewd. It's still just going to be a little bit teen plus, not adults only or mature. Living Witch Cottage game Rika for PC is going to be published by Fireshine Games, which I guess this is the Baba Yaga with the chicken leg cottage. I don't know if you're playing as the Baba Yaga or if you're chasing after it. I don't know if there's much more of a game there than that. Seems like you're playing as a young version of the Baba Yaga. Which the Baba Yaga is not particularly well known as a story, so you can kind of do anything you want with it, other than it's just a witch that lives in a house with chicken legs that moves. Avatar Generations is now available as a free-to-play RPG based on the Avatar The Last Airbender. Visually, it doesn't look particularly polished. I wouldn't expect too much from it, but I'm sure the Avatar fans, who I assume are still fans of Avatar, will give it a try. Not sure how many Avatar fans are still around. There's a lot of things that got really popular and got talked about when they were really popular, but I imagine people grew up out of those obsessions. Whereas for previous decades, if you were big into like Neon Genesis Evangelion as an anime fan, super fan otaku, you were talking about like Neon Genesis for probably 10-15 years plus. Now in part that's because they kept making remakes and there was an argument to watch some new content or a remake or re-release of it multiple times, but also there was just a level of obsession there that you just can't have in modern times because things come and go too fast, and particularly in anime, it's like once something stops airing for a season or two, you are totally uninterested in discussing that anime because there's just something else to talk about. Moving on, stealth action adventure game Still Seed announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Just moved my chair, by the way, which is why I was moving my microphone and shifting. This recliner with leaning back and putting the feet up is super helpful for me, but it's really helpful in the sense that I probably am turning less and less capable of sitting in a regular chair for long periods of time. Let's see. A game called Deceive Inc. launches March 21st. If anything, this looks like that this might be a spin-off of the Evil Genius series. It definitely has an art style similar to that, with the soft 3D CGI appearance to it. It's a multiplayer espionage game from Tripwire and Street Bandit Studios, so I don't think either one of those worked on the Evil Genius series. Yeah, this could be interesting, but it probably plays totally different from Evil Genius and is much more of a stealth multiplayer experience, whereas Evil Genius is a strategy trap, almost tower defense game that's single player. Let's see. Loop 8 Summer of the Gods launches June 6th in the West for apparently the PC, PS4, Xbox, and Xbox One and Switch, 5 days after the Japanese release. Well, this girl is in much fancier outfit than this school outfit or this outfit. And then these guys, they're all in different outfits, which implies to me that none of them go to the same school, or maybe there's an implication here that none of them are even school age. Maybe that's what they're going for. But yeah, also that definitely creates visual differences in which I would really have a hard time confusing this girl from this girl from this girl, or this guy from this guy from this guy. They all have different hair colors, they all have different outfits, they all have something kind of unique around them. If anything, there's like a completely different color palette here compared to this color palette compared to this one. Color palettes are pretty similar between these two, but this guy has a little bit more emphasis on green than different color palettes and patterns here. This is apparently a JRPG. Let's see if we can get a general idea of what it looks like in gameplay. See the blurred things. It's kind of ridiculous. I have to have blurs on top of blurs. Yeah, in a lot of ways this seems like this might be a Persona type game where you're running around the city, you're running around the school. At some point, I would assume you get into a dungeon and actually do some fighting, although not really seeing too much around that. So it is possible to make a role-playing game where you are just playing a role and not fighting people. There doesn't have to inherently be violence in games, but there usually is. This might be one of maybe 2 or 3 games that have a chance of being like Persona, but not having the baggage of Persona, in that you need to play Persona 3 before you can play Persona 4 and you probably should play several more of the Shin Megami series in general to understand the full storyline happening in the Persona series, since it's a spin-off of that. Moving on, the Lords of the Fallen has some new screenshots. Which, okay. These are interesting screenshots. They look good. They look better than, say, that Daedalic Golem game. And it's a shame that they didn't get another Middle-earth game. What was that called? It was Middle-earth something. and the first one was very well received, where you were just running around killing orcs over and over again, and it had a nemesis system. And then the second game totally ruined the game balance by trying to add microtransactions, and that ruined the whole series. That's yet another example of previous people in charge of WB Games ruining their own titles. The game Horus is coming to the PS4 and Xbox One on February. It's currently available on PC, so we could look here. Horus is, I think, a kind of platformer type game. Yeah, I think it's a platformer game where you spin the world upside down. You can see it's fairly well received, and that would give me an excuse to potentially purchase it. Although I would lean towards saying this is probably worth more at $6 and not worth it at $14.99. It seems like there's a lot of randomness around Horus in total. You're this robot who they lie to and convince to commit crimes as part of it that I saw. Very possibly it is also just one of those weird games that a lot of people don't want to play. Like, I recently played a game called Dropsy, and that was definitely a weird game that was too weird even for me. The Crew Motorfest announced for basically everything including Luna, which, yeah, it's weird to even mention Luna, Amazon Luna service. It's just so irrelevant. I'd kind of like to see Luna fail before the end of this year, and Amazon instead focus more on just giving away Steam codes for their Prime gaming. I suppose it's worth mentioning Twitch also has talked about what they're going to try and improve. They haven't given any specific timelines, I think, to any of it, but they came out and made a bunch of announcements as far as this is what we're thinking about, this is what we're working on, which I guess that's some progress, at least, is to have ambition is the first step. Kart Ryder Drift Season 1 launches March 8th on the PS4, Xbox One, PC, iOS, and Android. This looks to me like this is just another Mario Kart game, mostly focusing on mobile, and I wouldn't have a lot of hope in it being successful since the characters don't look particularly interesting and aren't from any show or game I recognize. Star Wars Jedi Survivor has been delayed to April 28th, no longer due on March 17th. That's a fairly specific date though, so hopefully it just sticks to that delayed date and doesn't delay again. Game companies really need to get their stuff together and just have more reasonable release dates, or not announce an actual release date until the game is already gold in the first place. It is just kind of ridiculous to announce a date and delay a date. It's not as bad as we've seen it in many other instances, but there definitely have been some games that get delayed multiple times, and a lot of Japanese games that's just standard operating procedure to announce a date and then delay it later. We already talked about Rumbleverse ending service. And we already talked about 46 games being delisted from the Xbox 360 marketplace. Apex Legend mobile ending service. A lot of things being shut down. Capcom sales update says the Resident Evil 2 remake is at 11.2 million. The Resident Evil 3 remake is at 6.4 million. And Devil May Cry is in the top 10 of the list. Now we saw something else, Halo Infinite, like I think it was, that hit 11 million. And if anything, that probably points to how poorly Halo Infinite is done, because Resident Evil 2 Remake is is a horror game, and so you have to assume that at least half of all potential people who would play video games are going to skip a horror game, whereas Halo Infinite, if that was the game that hit 11 million, I can't even remember, definitely wouldn't have that problem. It is a gamer bro first person shooter game, so some people wouldn't play it, particularly me, but that would be about it. That would be a small number. Monster Hunter World at 18.6 million, so this really goes to show you can at best hope for 15 million to 20 million in a super successful game, but more realistically you should expect at most 10 million in the long run. And I don't think you would consider any of these games, even at getting like 3 million, as a failure as far as units sold, because you then have to multiply the millions of units by the $50, $60 you paid for this. Okami selling 2 million is a small niche game. Particular editions of Resident Evil 4 selling 2 million for like the Wii version alone. And I don't think anything in this top 100 list would be something that they would consider a poor seller. And they only mention things that have sold 1 million, so Devil May Cry 3 Special Edition or Street Fighter Alpha 3 for the PlayStation 1, like, making these lists, and I assume are just going to make the list longer and longer and not stop at 110 in the future. The fact that as a company you have over 100 games that have sold over 100 million units definitely shows Capcom has this underlying success in a very long history of releasing games, but a vast majority of these games are like games that are particularly old. So selling like 1.51 million for Mega Man 2 for the NES in 1988 is a much better success than, say, selling something like Resident Evil 4 for the GameCube in 2005. Moving on, Megaton Musashi X DLC V Navigators Inugami Korone and Jibanyan is now available. So, yeah. Some anime cat girl character here, and then anime cat character. Or anime dog girl, I think is actually what she is. Famitsu has its review scores for issue 1783, giving a game called Drainus for the Switch 32 out of 40. I don't even know that. They give Forspoken 35 out of 40. Interesting. So there's something about Forspoken that really appealed to the Famitsu people, particularly playing it on the PlayStation 5 version, which is probably the best version of Forspoken to play. Noticeably, maybe they had higher standards for One Piece Odyssey because they gave that a 31 out of 40, which is a pretty pathetic low score. There is definitely the whole idea of isekai that would appeal more to the Japanese audience than the Western audience. That a lot of people don't know what isekai means, but it means you're moved to another world. She came from what is effectively the real world into this magical fake world, and maybe that helped. It could also be that there was massive differences in the translation in the English version versus the Western version, or maybe just Square Enix bribed the right people at Famitsu. I doubt Famitsu takes bribes. That's a joke to say, not in a real allegation. But yeah, I could see there being like just better Japanese voice acting, better Japanese writing, and that could address a lot of the issues. And that Square Enix just did not really try hard enough to make a Western localization of the game that would sell. Witchspring R has its Steam Next Fest demo now available. We might see a lot of Steam Next Fest demos coming out and being announced. Witchspring R looks to me like it's a RPG game. Turns out, I guess it's a turn-based RPG game. Problem here, certainly though, is as far as the Steam Next Fest goes, I don't have time for the demos. It's not particularly fair to put this game on the fall list, but I have hit a point now where I've had so many games I've missed that I really have to go back on my thought of not putting things on the fall list until it has a release date, because it seems like that's too late. So coming soons are going to be more of a thing, although in all fairness, I will only put things on the fall list if it says coming soon and it has some kind of relevancy that's extra, in the sense that Gematsu or Video Games Chronicles or even GameDeveloper.com is linking me to it, or I somehow otherwise hear about that game. If I just see a random game listed and it says coming soon, which I don't think I would see that because I have filters to filter those out, I wouldn't put it on the fall list. So there'll be very few games on the fall list, relatively speaking, that don't have release dates. A game called Sugunohi, it almost doesn't sound Japanese, as a DLC for Supernatural Supermarket now available. It's the 10th story in the horror game series. Let's see. So there's like a series of horror games. And this is DLC. It's a very flat animation style. The main game is mixed in the moment. So yeah, I remember this game. It looks very weird as a collection. They call these Japanese horror games, but yeah. How much was this DLC selling for? Another $2? I think I would lean towards saying no here, but I will leave this on the fall list just to see how this goes. I suspect people were... Well, you know what? I can just remove it from the fall list here. Now, 72% is not high enough. 64% now. Yeah, it's middle of the road. Visually, you can also tell it's pretty middle of the road as far as quality goes. Need to hurry. EXE Killer gameplay reveal trailer is available according to Gematsu, which is some kind of action adventure game. Looks like it's probably a first person shooter of some sort. There might be something to this, there might not. It might be an attempt at something like a Fallout game too. Atomic Heart has a gameplay overview trailer, which probably would be nice to watch the gameplay overview, but I just don't have time to do it. So let's see if we can just maybe skip through this. Like, at the core of it, I think we know that it is a first-person shooter that is going to feel a little bit like BioShock Infinite, except for in a Russian world and weirder technology. Yeah, definitely has been trying to sell itself as feeling like a BioShock game, and I hope it actually can succeed there. I hope that there's actually a game here at all. As a gameplay overview trailer, there was a lot of either in-game cutscenes or they're showing. But yeah, it's a Bioshock game. Good. It looks like there is actually some gameplay here. That's a little reassuring because there's been a lot of teases. Looks like there might be some heavy upgrades here. And a looting aspect where you can loot things from a distance, which is something every game really needs. And very few games, or no games, have had up until this point. There is definitely a danger where the cutscenes are going to be a little too disconnected from the actual gameplay. You definitely can see some inspirations around other games. So they are stealing, certainly, from other people, which that's not a terrible idea, is to steal the good components and the good parts from other games. Although they still have to make a good game. Let's see. Clive and Wrench Year of the Rabbit and gameplay preview trailers are available if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. Interesting, you have this like flat animation style here, and then you have 3D animations here. It's apparently a PC, Switch, PS5, PS4 platformer. Yep. It looks like it's going to be a little low polygon and probably trying to sell towards kids, and hopefully it would be good, but I wouldn't have a lot of faith that it's good. Hogwarts Legacy has a launch trailer if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. WWE has a trailer. Brock the Investigator for consoles launches March 1st. It's already available on PC. The GitHub founder has established an indie games publisher called Null Games. The first published title is a roguelike hockey game called Tape to Tape. Now, GitHub founder, I guess, is somewhat questionable as far as, well, you know that Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, or the main guy in charge of Linux, or whatever you want to call it, is the person who created Git, the software. But GitHub itself is the website that you can publish your Git repository to GitHub, or you can publish your Git repository to other places, other websites, other servers, or you could just keep your Git repository, I think, just local. So I don't know if Linus Torvalds had any hand actually in making GitHub, which then makes Chris Wansrath, the person we're talking about, questionable as far as how much has he really done to potentially be the person who would become a publisher of video games. Like, has he worked in the industry at all? Does he have really that kind of funding that you need to be a publisher, or what? I mean, at a certain level, any publisher might be great, or any publisher might be awful. Most publishers tend to be pretty bad. They are, by default, by definition, trying to leech off other people's work and make profit off of other people's effort, and in exchange they fund the development of games, so they allow for bigger games to be made, but then they put a lot of restrictions and often a lot of changes into those games that make them worse. It would be better if everybody had universal basic income and could just independently publish their games whenever they were done with them, instead of having to have a publisher, which is almost like a bank, just giving loans out to people to develop games and then coming back and demanding repayment threefold of those loans after the product is released. Threefold is maybe an exaggeration, but it's basically the concept. Yeah, money lending with interest in itself is arguably immoral, and they somehow have convinced people that it isn't. It's one thing to lend a friend $10 because they need it and they'll pay you back on payday. It's a different thing to lend somebody $10 and then demand $20 on payday for the convenience. One is a moral act because you're doing something nice for somebody. One is an immoral act inherently, just an opposite of that, because you are profiting off of somebody's misfortune. Moving on, Shadow Warrior 3 Definitive Edition has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, and PC. Due out February the 16th as a free upgrade. I guess that means Shadow Warrior 3 came out a while ago, which I wouldn't have been 100% certain that there was a Shadow Warrior 3. I knew there was a Shadow Warrior 2, but I don't really recognize this imagery or the name Shadow Warrior 3. Let's see. The PlayStation Plus monthly games lineup was announced. I think we've already covered that. Amnesia: The Bunker has been delayed to May 16th. God of War Ragnarok sales have topped 11 million. Oh, I guess it was God of War, not Halo Infinite. Well, same argument applies. Yeah, God of War Ragnarok should be selling double what Resident Evil 2 Remake sold. Even though Resident Evil 2 Remake is a pretty good game, a lot more people would be willing to play God of War than a horror game. There was a lot of hype in particular around God of War Ragnarok, and then that hype didn't seem to equal sales, at least so far in the first 11 weeks. Now, give it 3 months and maybe this will be up to 20 or 30 million sales. But yeah, there was arguably too much hype around Ragnarok, and they were trying to cut back on the hype, and maybe that was a mistake on their part. But obviously not a lot of pre-orders to get the numbers up. Not enough pre-orders to get the numbers up. Alright, let's just make sure we got a blur going. And so far so good. I haven't gotten any strikes for the experimental blur and showing adult content. So either nobody's looking at my channel, my videos, or the algorithm is not able to automatically flag them. And thank goodness nobody is manually trying to flag any of my videos. Please don't do that. I think we can say no to Animal Portal Puzzle. So yeah, it seems like we've maybe found a nice middle ground here. I don't know why this bundle would have shown up as a new product. Maybe they've added something new to this bundle, or maybe I don't think I was looking at this bundle. Maybe I was. Alien Slayers. X-Invader Prologue. Looks like it's probably a joke game with the animation. And then let's see, like a Vampire Survivors type game. There's an inconsistency in the art style that I want to penalize this from, on top of being just a top-down twin stick shooter. See, even if this was just like the logo of the developer, this is just kind of a bad logo of a developer, to have a muscly guy in a Pikachu suit with lightnings. That feels like the developer's not taking it seriously. And we may have prologues and demos come out, particularly right now, because of the Steam Next Fest and people trying to get attention for their low-effort garbage games. It is very weird to hear about the article as far as there being people inside of Steam wanting to do more curation as far as what is allowed on Steam. and in part also having made that same argument, but knowing that what I mean by curation on Steam is not what the people inside of Valve mean by curation. I'll give this a chance. This looks weird enough to be interesting. Yep, Vampire Survivors, Dungeon Survivors clone. At the end of the day, as much as I might be interested in English language not supported, only Italian. Oops. I was almost going to give this a follow and a YouTube short. Like, you kind of have to just throw up your hands and take that pure free speech absolutionist stance and say no curation whatsoever as far as games on Steam. Because if you do anything more than that, you just create this slippery slope. It gives us a chance. Like, this is still probably a garbage religious game, but I would like to see what that is. A lot of the YouTube shorts certainly are getting comments just about on the really garbage games. So I am getting like more views, the worst games I highlight compared to the better games I highlight, which is not my intention really. I don't want to just actively try and find the worst looking games possible and flood my YouTube shorts with garbage games, because eventually people will very quickly bore of that and want to actually highlight good games, or at least games that have some reason for people to look at them. Disgusting puzzles. I think we can say no to that. The cooking class. Not really seeing any cooking here. Just looks like a horror asset flip game to me. Mullet Hell. Looks like a joke game. So yeah. I definitely should solidify my opinion as far as games on Steam is, even though there's a garbage amount of games on Steam, if there's going to be any curation, there needs to be kind of a system that is either very democratic or in some way very absolutionist, free speech absolutionist in its move, and I don't know how exactly you would do that. For the most part, putting out garbage games or even mediocre games like this on Steam Direct doesn't matter. You don't have the Streisand's effect by, and this is what Gabe Newell allegedly has argued too, is that you release this game on Steam, nobody buys it, you don't then get accused of censorship, and you don't get a Streisand's effect where more people hear about the game. Which, in all fairness, that is kind of accurate. On the other hand, there are definitely some games that are 100% pure troll games and pure garbage games. And if I was in charge of curating and did have to curate games on Steam, I could create a baseline of quality in my mind, in my own personal opinion, and try and eliminate a bunch of games that way. The best system, I guess, would probably be Steam Direct is $100 to list it for the first year. Then you have to reach a certain number of units sold, say 1,000 units sold, and pay another $100 to continue its existence on Steam the next year. And I'm picking years when probably I should be picking 3-month periods. That would be the case. or just established some relationships with people who are Steam Direct listers before you get those limitations removed. And the problem that definitely runs into it, and the issue that is way more interesting to me, this might be a good game, it's probably not, though, is that on one hand, they say they're letting everything on Steam, but then multiple times there have been anime games that have not been allowed on Steam. Anime games that sometimes have adult content in them, anime games that sometimes don't have adult content in them, and anime games that have like adult patches on other storefronts, and there's just been no addressing that in particular, as that being the one inconsistency, the one thing that they are saying no to when they are saying yes to basically everything else. And they have made some rules, like the school shooting simulators are not going to be allowed. Anything that gets them bad press is not going to be allowed. The political troll games that target Trump and Putin seem to either have just stopped overall or been not allowed. Arguably, a lot of the thought has always been that a lot of the garbage games on Steam were just money laundering. So better systems and better efforts to catch money laundering efforts, or just not doing business with people. It's unfair to say not doing business with people in Russia, but honestly, you shouldn't be doing business with people in Russia, and at this point I don't think you even legally could do business with people in Russia. But same is true for China. It's like if you just had stricter requirements as far as Chinese publishers than other countries, it would be unfair, certainly, but it would also help balance the storefront. One thing they could do, certainly, is say, what is your game most like? And make them pick a game in comparison. And then ask the question, is your game anywhere as good as this game that is most like? And just make them sign on a piece of paper and lie to you to say, hey, this maze break game is most like the Talos Principle. And then you could say, alright, you've given me the game to compare it with. Let me go look at that one comparison, and that'll be the standard which you hold it yourself to. Which, or this is most like Bomberman, which is probably is closer to a Bomberman game than the Talos Principle. But even at that, when you have a game like this that compares itself to something big, and then you could have a human look at it and go, well, you've compared your game to this. We did not find it good enough. Either find a different comparison, you have 2 more tries as far as games that were published on Steam, or give up. Because a game like Maze Break here would have a hard time finding any other game that was of similar quality or less quality than this on Steam, particularly if you have a limitation of you have to pick a game that has a very high positive review rating and a certain number of reviews. A certain number of reviews also would be a very democratic way to censor things too, is to say, if this game has come out a year ago and it has no user reviews at all, it just has no relevancy at all. So we're not going to keep it on our storefront. They could at the very least clean up the storefront with as far as old games. But does any of that really matter to Valve? I don't think it does. I'm not sure if this is a hidden object game or just a weird visual novel. A weird Western visual novel telling a kind of crocodile story. You know, it's weird that we haven't had more of this cheesy B-movie type stories. Like, you could tell all kinds of stories with visual novels, and it's strange that they're all almost always romances or horrors. I think I'm going to say no to Don't Get Lost. I've said yes to a lot of games here, but Don't Get Lost doesn't quite look visually polished enough to interest me. Interesting also is we have today is Wednesday, and that always seems to be the times. It's like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday seems to be the times when they don't allow adult games on Steam. So here you have what is probably a visual novel that has some adult patch somewhere, or had adult content in it somewhere, but as it is, it's not in the adult section. It has Japanese full audio, and scenes of sexual activity are not included, but there are some lewd poses, I suppose. There's no DLC here, if there's an adult patch to this somewhere, which I'd assume. This whole nurse outfit is fairly popular in Japan, although I don't know if it really exists in Japan, and it certainly is not the way nurses dress in the United States. They sort of kind of dressed like that in the old days, many decades ago, but nowadays it's all same old kind of boring out clothes that they're kind of genderless and neutral in their appearance, and you're not wearing a hat per se like that, and you're usually wearing a smock that is just going to get dirty, and you're going to take it off and replace it with another smock 4 or 5 times in an episode, or in a what's the word? A work shift. And of course you have the anime aspect where you can make the clothes stick to the skin much in an unnatural way, so you can get a lot more cleavage showing than would actually be showing. That all being said, this doesn't really look like that interesting of a visual novel. And that may very well be the only adult game that we get today, if we're looking at February 1st listings now. 4-color puzzle. I'm going to give this a chance, but not make a YouTube short around it. Let's see. Trying to really hurry here, but definitely was moving kind of slow today. 4-card game. Too simplistic, I would say. Fireworks simulator. Honestly, just asking people to justify their existence can really crush the spirit of a lot of people anyway. So if in the application process Valve did require you to compare yourself and justify your existence a little bit, and not just fill out absolute garbage into your into the forums, and they actually verified some of the information, that'd be great. Honestly, if they just asked a math problem and made people do a somewhat complicated math problem, that might eliminate half of the garbage games on Steam anyways. I am still looking for a good skee ball game. This obviously is not it though. And that brings us to the GameDeveloper.com articles. Meta and Ready at Dawn are shutting down Echo VR, a game I've never even heard of. But yeah, another VR game. Battle Royale brawler Rumbleverse is being canned after just 6 months. I guess the question is the underlying technology in Metaverse going to be something that you could reuse by Epic Games? Probably. It's probably the same Fortnite technology with just new characters. Anyways. Keywords has acquired the PR agency 47 to expand its marketing business. Keywords gets mentioned a lot by GameDeveloper.com and not by anybody else. Here, they say the GitHub co-founder Chris Wansrath forms a publisher, Null Games, from GitHub to indie publisher. the question, I guess, is who was the other co-founder of GitHub? Yeah. Wandsworth founded GitHub in 2007 with Scott Chanko, PJ Hyatt, and Tom Preston Warner. I may have heard of that name. And so he co-founded it with 4 different people. And he served as the company CEO until it was acquired by Microsoft in 2018. So that's why he's now doing that. Now forming a new company. Yeah, I kind of had forgotten that Microsoft had acquired GitHub. I guess at that point, if Microsoft has acquired GitHub, almost certainly Linus Torvalds is not involved with GitHub. Let's see, Techland's Dying Light franchise has hit 30 million copies sold, which I imagine a lot of that certainly is the first game. The second game not particularly well received, but not terrible either. Nobody's still complaining about it, at least, and there probably will be a third Dying Light, one that maybe gets back to more basics as far as the first game. There's far too much content in Dying Light 1, so whenever I get around to actually playing it, yeah, I'll probably have more than enough time to also play Dying Light 2 before Dying Light 3 is released. Well, no. Actually, it would probably be the exact opposite scenario, wouldn't it? Whenever I get around to playing Dying Light 1, I'll probably still be playing it by the time Dying Light 3 gets released. So, yeah, I'm very far behind there. God of War Ragnarok sold over 11 million copies in 3 months. The U.S. Commerce Department has called on Apple and Google to allow more stores on their platform. They're arguing that the more app stores there are, the healthier the mobile app scene will be. Arguably, I kind of believe that too. Like, it really is not a healthy environment at the moment, with just a monopoly on Android phones by Google and a monopoly on Apple phones by Apple. Google being a little bit more open, but not really. It's a true monopoly on Apple phones, whereas a de facto monopoly on Google phones. There's a report that EA and Respawn canceled a single-player Apex Legends game. Same old news. Alright. And so then we're at the follow list. And Candy Girlfriend. I feel like I just put this on July 8th. Nope, this is an old adult game that's mostly negative, so we can take that off the follow list, which is fine. It's not like I can really cover adult games anyways. Call Me Dots. It's a dot game of no relevancy, so we'll take that off. Doing the follow list cleanup. Galuna has like no reviews at all. Is this a VR game? Like the 3 people that have gotten the game have gotten it for free, so their 3 reviews don't count, according to the algorithm, which that's actually works as far as the review algorithm pretty well. Yeah, 2021 game, that's gotta go. It's just not relevant. Call of the Wild, the Angler, mixed reviewed, that can go. So it really is a lot of push-pull as it is, in that you are adding a lot of games to the follow list as far as new games, and then you go back and look at these games 6 months to several years later and they just don't have any reviews. That's why my follow list system and wish list system works pretty well in particular, is because if Valve just followed the same system and said you have to have at least 30 reviews in 1 year's time where your game gets delisted, and you have to pay another $100 to keep it listed, that would get rid of a lot of garbage games on Steam. But they'd all be very old garbage games. And you still would have a problem of new people trying the same thing. But overall, eventually the message would probably get out that it's not worth it, it's not profitable. Here you have a case of an anime visual novel thing, and here is a very moe girl, very small hands compared to the male hands of the man on top of her. So this isn't in the adult section, and it does say veiled nudity and kissing, and all characters are over 18 years old. But yeah, why this game was allowed on Steam and why others weren't is mostly a question, other than the fact I would say in this case there's only this school outfit in the screenshot, and then every other outfit is like a non-school outfit. Like this is probably also a school outfit too, but maybe not. But yeah, I would think that this screenshot alone would have raised some red flags. There's definitely an inconsistency there. Like, it would be probably nicer if they just confirmed, if it was just a standard policy to say we hate anime visual novels and we're just not allowing them. If they just came out and said that, that would be better than the inconsistent see. But certainly that's Valve in a nutshell, is that there's just an inconsistency. Cabin Fever, a visual novel living in a cabin in an apocalypse type thing. It is very positive too. It's out of early access. That's all I really need to know. Put it on the wish list. Am I ever really going to cover any of these visual novels? Probably not. Cassiopeia. Kapora Adventure. OGB's Revenge. Is this the first game in this series? I kind of want to say yes to this. And it is at like 84% of 25 users, so it's already there. There is a lack of visual polish here, but I'm kind of making an exception because this is based on Brazilian folklore, and you're just not going to have that many Brazilian folklore things, although they're saying it's based on Brazilian folklore. I have no idea if that's true or not. So, yeah, kind of making an exception for diversity reasons. Yeah, just more different stories, different perspectives, different cultures being represented in games. And I'll put that on the wish list. It almost certainly would have gotten 30 reviews anyways. But certainly when I start to make these kinds of exceptions, then it opens the door to why not make an exception when something's 100% positive at 15 reviews. Which I won't do this time because A, this visually doesn't look that good, and B, this isn't that old of a game. Just leave it. Button City. Narrative adventure game. Looks kind of kid friendly. We'll put that on the wish list. Of course, also me adding a bunch of things to the wish list doesn't really mean anything when I'm just not buying games on the wish list at all. It's been probably since Black Friday since I last bought something, and I'm not really planning on buying anything now. Here we have another visual novel that's very positive, and the relevancy here is extremely higher than the other visual novels. Alright, well, then that is that. So we'll then take off the blur and do this. Bring back here. Because we have a Duel live to watch, so I'll start that. And then I'll scroll down my Twitter feed. And then that'll be it for the stream. We've gone 3 hours. Moving slow. Definitely. It's been a slow day. 48 tweets. 48 tweets in 3 hours is probably a little less than before. But as far as like Twitter goes, there isn't really a major new controversies or anything like that. Yep. So yeah, it definitely feels like Twitter has just settled in. The real blow certainly will come when somebody else announces some new service that's exactly like Twitter but run by a different company. If Amazon, for instance, announced a service like that, that would be weird, but it wouldn't be terrible. Because, yeah, there is... Yeah, it would kind of make a lot of sense for Amazon.com to have its own service and advertise its own products exclusively through that Twitter-like service or Facebook-like service. You could build better profiles and have a browsing profile on top of a shopping profile for each user. You could build into an Amazon Twitter service a requirement to own Amazon Prime, so you're actually paying for it, and at that point then you don't have to show ads, and you can still build profiles around what people are talking about as far as products and items. So then just it would be better suggestions when you went to Amazon.com to shop based on your posts on an Amazon Facebook or Amazon Twitter. It would probably not make them as much money as they would like, but it would still work and overall. Yep, but having 48 new tweets definitely did not lead towards anything new to say. Yeah. I do kind of get the feeling though I need to collect all of these before I can get the next Duel Live view. So I want to make sure I jump in here. It's not as important to collect this, but we will. More crafting points and a purple frame for whatever that's worth. We're at level 30 of 100. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and gift me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.